the Phoenix metropolitan area where the with the temperature is what, Eric? I think it's 109 or something, and with the chill factor 108.
We can feel fall's first bite. You're exactly right. Yeah. Nice.
So anyway, I got my regular guest with me, Eric Larson, captain, former captain, I guess now, and good buddy to fly with, and our ace first officer and chief technical officer, Dieter Stoutinger. And we're going to have a special guest tonight, and we'll be introducing him in just a minute. We want to welcome you. This is the place where we hope you come if you have an issue with flying, or you know somebody who has an issue of flying, or last but not least, if you just want to talk about airplanes and aviation. We'd love to have you with us. And we broadcast every week at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, 9:30 Eastern, and the replays are available. So if you're watching us live, or if you're watching a replay, please leave a comment down there and let us know. We like to remind you every week that we do have a special Facebook group called FearlessFlight Birds of a Feather for people like yourselves who might need a little bit of support from time to time, or a lot of support for when you decide you want to fly. Feel free to go over there to that link at the bottom and join the group. And leave a comment there, leave a little bit about your background. And it's a place where you can both give and receive feedback. We welcome everybody over there. We're up over 600, working our way towards 700. So help us keep those numbers climbing there. Okay, well, this week we were lucky enough to have a special guest. His name is Professor Arnold Barnett. And I started following Professor Barnett back in 2007, I believe. I think he had a whole life before me there, but that's when I first saw a presentation that he put on up at MIT, where he is a tenured professor there, and he talked about the main thing that I started following for was his treaty of the odds of dying in an airplane crash. And I had some biases myself about how all the different ways you could represent that. And he had a way that really touched me. And so I was a little bit intimidated by his expertise and all that, waited, but then finally last year reached out to him. And not only did he have a warm greeting and interaction with me, but he consented to combine a trip to his daughter down in the LA area to appear at our live class in Burbank last October. So the other day, who would have known? I opened up my news feed and I saw this article about the odds of catching COVID-19, and in particular related to the middle seat. And guess who the author was? It was our good friend Arnold. So I'd like to ask him to come and join us right now, and he can say a few words about his background there. And if you have any questions, please put them down on the Facebook there. Dieter will be monitoring that. So hey, welcome, Arnie. I'm glad that you could make it, and thanks for doing it on such short notice. Oh, I think you have you're still muted.
I think I have unmuted. Okay.
There you go. Great.
Okay. Well, no, Captain, I'm delighted to be here.
And the first thing maybe is just talk a little bit about your own. Yeah, the one thing that impressed me when I first heard you back in 2007 was that you used to have an issue with flying yourself. So if you could tell everybody or share that with everybody.
Well, I think the Grateful Dead used to have a song, "What a Long, Strange Trip It's Been." So let's start at the beginning, go through the happy phase, and then we'll talk about COVID. But okay, yeah, cool. I used to be afraid to fly. I am older than many of the people listening probably. And when I was a kid, growing up in Brooklyn, New York, we didn't fly. And the only time you really heard much about planes was when they crashed. We're talking about propeller planes back in the 1950s, for example. Yeah. So, in a word association test, if someone said plane, I would have blurted out crash. And so I was frightened of flying. And I did start to fly actually, I guess my first flight was when I was 19 or something. But I still was nervous about it. If I had a flight on Friday, by Wednesday already I would be edgy, and the rest of the week. And even though I thought probably the risk is not high, nonetheless, there was this fear. And of course, even turbulence at that time, was enough to let me think that somehow the plane was about to fall apart. It never did, by the way.
Right.
But
And we were flying at low, you would have been flying at much lower altitudes in those days too, before the jet era, or the all jet era.
No, well, but by the time I was flying, we were in the jet era.
Oh, okay.
Actually, but yeah. But in any case, though, so I thought, though, I'm a statistician, and I thought, why don't I see what the numbers look like and perhaps try to get a sense of the risk? And I did some work on the safety of flying, the chance of dying in a crash as a function of, for example, what country you're flying in, what kinds of airlines you're flying in, etc. And the numbers were enormously reassuring and getting better and better and better, decade after decade after decade. And that we have two captains on this message here that have spoken, and they are part of a process which I think is actually the eighth wonder of the world.
Yeah.
That we got to the point where a kid in the United States was something like 4 or 5 times as likely to grow up to be president as to perish on the forthcoming flight. The only thing is that COVID has come around, and that introduces a new element of risk, and we can talk about that. So I can't be as enthusiastic as I would have been and was a year ago when I met with Captain Ron and some of the people who were anxious about flying. And I remember we actually took a flight together as part of the course from Burbank to Oakland. And I remember I went up and down the aisle a little bit talking to the people who were in the class. And one of them said, the seatbelt sign is on. Don't you believe you have to follow rules? But in any case, though, I'm delighted to be here and to answer any questions that people have.
Have you flown since COVID since we've been under the influence of COVID here?
I don't think so. The last flight I took was on March 6th, American Airlines, by the way, from LaGuardia to Boston. And it was really just a few days after that when the calamity struck. I don't know whether any of you people watch Saturday Night Live, but on Saturday, March 7th, they had a skit about LaGuardia Airport and all the problems of LaGuardia. It was very witty, actually. I'm sure you could catch it online now. But the point is, at that time, no one was thinking about the possibility that the COVID crisis would create such enormous instability in the airline industry. But then even a week later, when I was supposed to go back to New York, my wife and daughter were frantic. So I called up and said, I don't think I can come. But it turned out that was the week when schools like MIT suddenly closed down and no one was thinking about, let's say, meetings in an office in New York. So I haven't flown since then, Captain.
Okay. I flew in June. I flew on Southwest, and at the time they were maintaining the middle seat, making that empty. Unless you were traveling with a traveling partner, then you could occupy that.
That's right. They're still doing that in Southwest.
Yeah. Okay. But the basis, what really got my attention was this. Was it a study that you put together about the middle seat stay empty?
I guess you could call it that, a study. In that, yes, I just tried to do some calculations to estimate the risk. And of course, it's without boring people, there are a lot of details. For example, we know how many confirmed cases of COVID there are, but then in July, the head of the Centers for Disease Control said for every case that's confirmed, there are 9 others that are not confirmed. Okay. So in terms of just the chance that someone on the plane has COVID, we have to think of that. And then, of course, it's also true that people who fly are probably at lesser risk than others. The kind of people who are a little bit more affluent, more likely to be working at home now, etc. So I tried to take that into account. And people are wearing masks now. And these masks are really highly effective in preventing spread from you. They may not be so effective in protecting you, but in protecting others. Yeah. It's something like an 82% chance that they will, capture the droplets from a contagious person. Yeah. And then of course there are other elements that, because of the extremely good system of air purification on planes. That's not just hype, that's true.
Yeah,
You
right.
really are not in danger, except perhaps for people who are pretty close to you for the duration of the flight. I mean, the person who passes your row en route to the lavatory, this momentary proximity doesn't really entail any risk at all. But I tried to put all of these things together, you know, using the literature and come up with numerical estimates, both if the plane is full, if 2/3 of the seats are full, because airlines like Southwest and JetBlue and Delta are keeping the middle seat open. And even for the airlines that are willing to fill the middle seat, they can only do that if the demand requires it. So I said, well, what if in fact they're really not fully filling the plane? So as a practical matter, there are a lot of middle seats empty. So I did a variety of calculations of that sort about the risk of COVID. And of course, what people really fear of COVID is the possibility of death. And that could be there's a small chance, of course, for any given person, to the person on the plane, but there's also the danger of spreading it beyond the plane if you come down with COVID on a flight. You know, the 19-year-old kid who gets a case of COVID, asymptomatic, doesn't know anything, can nonetheless pass it on to his grandparents. So I tried to throw all of these things into a stew and come up with numbers and say, you know, they're not by any means perfect numbers. They're rough approximations, but better to have rough approximations than just to have a clash of conjectures. One person saying one thing, one person saying another. And that alone makes people nervous. And people are very nervous about flying now, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear some of the details that you put together there, some of the numbers.
Well, the numbers that came out, and again, this is an approximation, was that if you were on a full flight on an airline that's filling all the seats, then based on data from late June, which is probably pretty close to the data for now, your chance of coming down with COVID is something like 1 in 4,300 if the plane is completely full. If it's full except for the middle seats empty, so in that sense it's 2/3 full, that drops to about 1 in 7,700. So it drops by almost half, not fully half. It's actually something like a factor of 1.8, but it is a difference. Okay, and those are the numbers I came up with. Again, they depend a lot on the rate of course, the COVID infection. I mean, the corresponding calculations in Western Europe, for example, give much lower risks because the level of COVID infection in those countries is now just a small fraction of the level of what we face here. And in Canada, for example,
even the city of departure would affect your chances.
Yes, it could affect. Well, the only thing is, it could affect your chances. But I was thinking, for example, I used Texas as an example of a state which had a relatively high recent rate of new infections. And New York, my home state, after all it's been through, is now the epitome of a state with a very low risk. And I considered both of those cases. But then I said, let's suppose you have a flight from, let's say, Dallas to New York. Well, you have some people who are Texans. You have some people who are New Yorkers. You have a lot of people who are connecting in Dallas at DFW, for example. So, in other words, even if in the destination the risk is low, the people on the plane are not by any means exclusively from that destination. But although, you know, for example, here up in the Northeast, where at the moment, after all, we've been through terrible, terrible times. But now the risks are very low. So if people got on a plane here in Boston, I assume they are less likely to be carriers of COVID because the local citizenry are not. And in theory, anyone visiting us was supposed to quarantine for 2 weeks. I'm not exactly sure how many people are doing that. But I think you're right, Ron, that it's certainly the case that where you get on might matter. But let's just hope that the risk of COVID goes down. And of course, there's somewhat encouraging talk about a vaccine, so that this would just be a nightmare that will come to an end.
And, you know, one of the things that I was thinking about too, there's kind of a parallel here between when people think about dying in the old days, if you will, flying on an airplane. And I point out to them, you know, you're a couple hundred times more likely, if not more than that, to die in an automobile on the way to the airport or going home. I think would this hold true for COVID-19 as well? You know, your risk is you got to get to the airplane, you know, so you might, it depends on what your personal lifestyle is to how much risk you've taken even before that. So, well,
but you know, I'll tell you, I did some calculations, and if you're talking about a car, well, if it's people you know, and let's say no one has COVID, then the great advantage of flying in terms of safety pre-COVID is much less now. And in fact, you know, you could even argue that because of the COVID risk in the flight and the much lesser COVID risk in the auto, the statistics are not all that different. Now, of course, then again, everything gets more complicated because, maybe the car is very low risk, but if you're only going 1/10 as fast, so you're probably going to have to stop on the way. And that means you might have to go into, you know, into restaurants, into motels, into bathrooms, etc. So I'm not sure exactly what the final calculation would be. But I think, though, that people now, I can only tell you, I mean, we're friends and we're going to be candid. I live in one of the suburbs of Boston, and I think everyone here is afraid to fly now. And this was unheard of a year ago.
Right. And I've said myself, you know, even though I try to balance the risk versus the need to fly, but right now I'm one that still says, if you don't have a real burning need to fly, why chance it right now? You know, why not just wait? And that's been my posture, you know, throughout the summer for sure. There was last week we were talking about, Eric found in the news, there were a couple of studies, I'll call them for lack of a more specific knowledge about it. One was in Germany that took place back in March, where they had and Eric, if you come on, and maybe you've heard about this as well. And they were looking at, we talked about the airflow on the airplane, and they were able to isolate to some degree where some people on a flight got infected. And were there two people, Eric, I think, that got infected?
Two different ones, and Dr. Barnett, correct me if I'm wrong, that were really impressive because the contact tracing was so good. In Germany, they were able to find out that they had two passengers infected and where they were sitting.
Yes.
And the people that subsequently got infected, they knew their positions from where the infected passengers were, which led to our discussion about the airflow through the cabin going out to the outflow valve, past the infected guys and out the outflow valve by the aft lab. And the only people that got zapped were one person across from them and somebody behind them, where the airflow was going by those passengers out the outflow valve. That was study number one that was impressive. And number two was in China, which we could say if they do one thing right, it's contact tracing, whether it involves a disease or not. And they knew that they had two infected passengers on an airplane with everybody masked up, and no one else on the plane ever got it or tested positive. It was those two that came up at the same time.
Yeah, and those outcomes, for what it's worth, are consistent with, you know, what I tried to do. I said, my understanding was the only passengers who might really have a chance of infecting you are those in your row, the row behind, or the row ahead. Yeah. And that, of course, is what happened in Germany. And also, especially if everyone's wearing masks, and don't forget the masks are highly effective, I'm not surprised that the people who are infected did not infect anyone else. You know, 1 in 4,300, you know, any given flight only has, what, 100 people on it? Right. So that means that, in other words, I wasn't surprised at these outcomes. And I'm glad that we have countries where the situation is well enough in hand that they can do this kind of contact tracing. I don't think we can do it here.
No.
In the United States.
Yeah, and I think that does bode well for just wearing a mask, regardless of whether you're flying or not. You know, it just points out that it's silly not to wear a mask.
And the latest studies have said that masks actually do protect. Initially, they were saying, well, of course, they change what they say every few weeks. Yeah. But first, they said that it protects others, but not really you. But now suddenly saying, you know, it protects you as well as others.
Yeah.
You know, so sure. Yeah, I think the mask wearing is very important. I myself sometimes wear a shield now in addition to the mask, so I look as if I got off a UFO.
That's really smart from what the AMA says and everything else. The masks are getting better and better, but if you have the shield on, then that protects you from the inbound. That way ups your chances of not being exposed.
Well, some airlines, I don't know whether I should mention specific. Well, I will mention a specific airline. Qatar, QATAR,
Right.
apparently is giving masks. I mean, and the shields out to the passengers in the coach section. It's optional in the business class because they said it's so spacious. You can socially distance there.
Yeah.
But those are
Little
things
PR.
one really can do that can help.
We have one of our former students who just left DFW Sunday, headed for Boston, and then on over to Dublin for a 2-year program for her doctorate. And she used to be afraid of flying, and Eric and I would joke about this sometimes. Throw another thread in there and you forget about the first one. So she was more concerned about the COVID than anything, and she does have a medical medical history, but she wore a mask as well, or both her and her husband wore a mask as well as a shield. And just for anybody who's interested, she landed and she was ecstatic. The flight went really super well, and you know, all those fears kind of went away there. So I'm going to throw it out to Dieter. If you have any questions, I'm assuming you would bring those up for Professor Arnold or Barnett. And just to kind of wind this up.
There are a couple, actually. There are a couple.
Okay, yeah, you want to brace those?
Let me just get back to the gallery view here. So just first of all, one of our very astute viewers, Jim, said that he's reading the abstract for the preprint already. So he's wondering, has it been published already, or will
it is undergoing peer review now.
Okay.
And the peer review process, unfortunately, is not short. What happens is you submit, and I don't have any results from the peer review, but what's happened is that I sent it in, and they send it out to 3 reviewers, anonymous reviewers, and they do it as volunteer work. So first you have to wait until the 3 reports are in. Then the editor will send them back to you, and almost always, even if they are favorably inclined, they have suggestions. So you then revise the manuscript, they send it back to the 3 reviewers, and then the editor looks at the reports from the 3 reviewers and may decide to accept it. This process almost always takes several months. So I don't have any results then. What I can tell you, though, and this might sound self-serving, is I had my own peer review. I had the paper reviewed by 5 people. 3 of them are sort of medical people, and 2 of them, well, actually, one of them is both a medical person and a statistician. And they had suggestions, and those are already embodied in this draft of the paper. So I would not have posted it without having some people look at it and tell me that it's not altogether irrational.
Okay.
So I'm afraid I don't have the peer-reviewed results yet. And of course, paradoxically, by the time the peer review is finished, I imagine the numbers will be different.
Yes, I was just going to ask you about
that. That's a problem. You see, it's an emergency now, and that's why people are posting the preprints so that people can at least look at these things and judge them on their merits even before there's a formal review process. Right. But I got some snide comments, people saying, is it your custom to send your studies to the media rather than for peer review? Yeah. And I said, I didn't submit the study to the media. I didn't contact anyone in the media. They went through, I guess, the papers about COVID and found this one interesting. Yeah. But anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying, no, I'm sorry, I don't have the peer-reviewed results yet. But I would imagine, of course, there will be some changes. You know, my general sense is that if you want a broad generalization, the medical people think things are a little more dangerous than I depicted, and the airlines think less dangerous. Yeah. So I think a little bit, remember Goldilocks and the porridge just right? So I like to think that if some people say it's too high, some people say it's too low, maybe it's just right.
Yeah, in the Goldilocks.
Ron and I have been talking with the with your information and the best, latest information we can get in Dieter. But then at the end, in closing, we say, that's our best assessment in the airplane, but good luck getting from the curb at the airport to the airplane or the parking garage to the airplane. On that deal, you're on your own, and we don't know anything about it.
That is very true. Well, sorry, I just want to throw this in because I think you get a kick out of it. We talked a little bit before about your background, and we have one viewer, Susan from Boston, actually Newton, and she's very astute, and she commented and said, it's actually sunny in Boston.
Well, it's dark in Boston.
Yeah,
now.
it's dark in Boston, exactly. So, so I just want you to know we're teaching mindfulness. We're teaching, all of these things, and our viewers are great students. So yeah, there's one more question. I think that
it's not.
Sorry. Okay, so I guess the question, I'm trying to just summarize this. What are the was that Susan, or let me just look here. So you're saying the numbers are fluid and the numbers will be changing, but is there any sort of accounting? So what I'm hearing, not being in the United States and kind of getting my news from all over the world, so to speak, is that these swab tests aren't actually as accurate as we would like them to be, and a lot of countries in Europe have already switched over to the saliva testing or are in the process of one, because it's more
I think they're quicker,
and two, they're quicker. It's like 20 minutes to an hour, you can get results. And
I know actually, that ASU is doing that. They're doing the spit test over here.
Actually, if you go to Vienna right now, and there's a lot of airports in Europe that offer that as well, instead of quarantining for 14 days, you can actually go and purchase one of those tests right at the airport. It takes about 2 to 3 hours, and then you're on your way with a certificate, so that you don't have to quarantine.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds promising. And as I understand it, by the way, Americans would not be admitted to Austria under any circumstances now.
Not currently, no.
Yeah, the EU regulations.
Yes, not currently.
In fact, Canada is not exactly welcoming us with open arms.
Right. Yeah.
Well, actually, no, because, the only way to get into your country from Canada is actually with an airplane, because all the land borders are mutually, agreed upon. They are closed until, at the very least, the end of September. But anybody who wants to come in from the United States, in addition to the 14-day quarantine, I believe, even if you're trying and coming in by a plane, you will have to kind of have a whole form filled out before you even get onto the plane. So, yeah, I think the whole rest of the world is taking the situation in your country a little bit more serious than your country.
We are on double secret probation for the entire world if we want to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Oops, to jump.
Well, I want to thank you, Arnie, for coming down or staying up late and joining us tonight. In closing this, can you just kind of give anybody any words of wisdom as to how you mastered your anxiety about flying, and any words of encouragement to them, all separate from the whole COVID-19 thing?
Well, look, I study statistics, so I believe numbers matter. It used to be. I would say, for example, if you board an airplane, this is pre-COVID and post-COVID, I hope, and we hope post-COVID era starts very soon, that the chance of being killed in a plane crash, something like 1 in 34 million in a country like the US, Canada, the EU, Israel, Japan, Australia, these countries. In my papers, I identify the countries that have the most outstanding records. Now, 1 in 34 million, and some people would look at that, people who are afraid to fly, and they'd say to me, I'll be the 1 in 34 million.
Right.
So then I'd say, if you have a 1 in 34 million risk per flight, and you took one flight every single day, Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays included, you realize you could go 99,000 years on average before succumbing to a crash. And the same people who said, the 1 in 34 million, I'll be the one, I said, 99,000 years? I'm not going to live 99,000 years, so I guess I'm safe. But is extraordinarily low, and flying, of course, gives us so much more of the world. That how am I ever going to get back to Vancouver or to Paris or to Asia without flying? So, in normal circumstances, the risk is so extraordinarily low that I personally think that it's so close to zero, it's not worth worrying about. When we go into a supermarket, we're not actively worried that the ceiling is about to collapse.
Right.
In the same way, we shouldn't worry that the plane is about to crash. And it's an extraordinary tribute to lots of people, including the two captains who are on the call on this video today.
Yeah. Perhaps second only to my admiration for you, I've come to be very impressed with a fellow named Daniel Kahneman's work about intuition, and, and how intuition dominates our judgment and decision making.
Exactly.
And part of his work, what I remember reading, is it touches on your work in that it's hard for the human mind to grasp statistics. I can't even imagine 99,000 years, to replicate those odds, or 1 in 34 million. And so we're predisposed to that. And so another fellow from, I think, who made his fame at MIT is John Kabat-Zinn, who started a whole mindfulness movement, and which is we're in a couple of weeks, we're going to do a mindfulness webinar, because we have always emphasized two pathways to overcoming your fear. One is to become more knowledgeable just about flying and airplanes and things like that. Yeah. Just a little common sense that goes a long way. Because the average person, as you said, has no concept of what it means to fly. Yeah. But the other part really is we've got to engage that thinking part of our brain, which gets pushed over by the elephant side, the intuition. And so we put a lot into that. And since we don't all have your expertise and wisdom to look at the statistics and talk our way through that, people have to reach out and do that. So, I think, I'll ask you this, probably the biggest reason for your success and fear moving into your past is you fly a lot. And the more you fly, the more you come to realize that, it is just a really over.
Well, that is true. After a while, you can't have your life flashing before your eyes twice a week. No. After a while, you sense this must be safe.
Yeah. And that's why I say, that's why when I get in the airplane, I fall asleep. I fall asleep before we get to the runway, only when I'm a passenger, not when I'm flying, of course. But
I was hoping that you'd make that distinction.
Right. But it's just, it becomes so routine, and we don't think when we get in our cars, we don't worry about somebody T-boning us routinely until we may read it in the newspaper or something like that. And the fact that aviation is so rare when you have crashes, that's why it becomes so popular. And that. So anyway, anything else? Any last words, Arnie? That we're
no, but I hope we'll all get a chance to fly again soon. Flying is enormously beautiful, and I hope that the current aberration will soon be a thing of the past.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah. Well, thanks again. Have a great evening, and we're going to continue to tap your wisdom here from time to time.
I would be honored to be part of an effort like this, which I think is enormously valuable.
Thanks. Have a great evening.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Barnett, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah.
Take care.
Okay, so let's move on to the words talking about the webinar. If you put that on the screen. And I'm going to let you take the flak, since I was instrumental in and moving it back one more week here.
Yeah,
I guess we
exactly.
don't make a big notion about that. If people never heard it before, they won't know. But we're going to do this now on what date?
So hold on. So before we even get started here, Eric, it sounded like you wanted to jump in there.
Chair recognizes Eric.
Thank you. Did you guys mean to still be transmitting?
Yes, we
Okay, good. Fine.
That's why every commercial airline has two pilots.
And for those out there wondering, when we get done, when we go off the air here, we do continue to stay on ourselves and banter a bit. So Eric was trying to keep us from embarrassing ourselves publicly any more than we normally do. So all right.
No, so so we are, and I hope the screen is sharing. We're having on Saturday, September 5th at 11 a.m. Pacific or 2 p.m. Eastern time.
And this is our final offer.
Yeah, for those of you who have been on, and yes, we know your names, Michelle and Susan. We apologize for having to postpone the webinar, partially because, to be honest with you, a lot of good questions came in response to, and so we actually wanted to do a better job. So we needed more time for that. And so we will actually do a webinar, and the link will be in the comments tonight. I will post it in a couple of minutes. It'll be free. It'll be on Saturday, September 5th. And basically, what we're going to talk about is all the benefits and the practice of mindfulness for you as a fearful flyer. And that's a really important distinction because, often as a therapist myself, a lot of people have found, apps that have meditations, and while we definitely encourage you to do all of those, if you happen to be afraid to fly or nervous about flying, on the webinar, we'll also share why we create these specific neurosync meditations, because of the power, how they can change our brains, and we'll dive into that a lot more. It's really exciting stuff, and actionable for you, not just in the case of you're being nervous about flying, but also in other areas of your life as well. So Saturday, September 5th, 11 a.m. Pacific, and it's free. And as part of registering, you get also access to our free Putting Mindfulness into Practice 101 audio series as well. So don't hesitate, sign up, and we'd love to see you on Saturday, September 5th.
So I want you to leave everybody with this. Think about this. You talk to yourself more than you talk to anybody else in your entire life. 50,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day per human being. Okay. So even if you're at the low end, imagine that. You are constantly talking to yourself, and people wonder why it's so hard to get over this. And when you just try to get them to do a simple affirmation or something like that, I can't do that, I can't do that. Well, you've been terrorizing yourself related to fear of flying, related to other phobias, related to public speaking, perhaps, related to standing up for yourself in a variety of ways. And so we finally, through Dieter's encouragement, he has said to me, we really need to help people beyond where we've been helping them before. We need to get out there. And so this is not just for fear of flying. This will transcend a lot of the anxiety that you might have in your life. So think about it.
I just want to say, many of you who are watching this, who are coming across our show, you're in other Facebook groups. You're in the Fear Flying Forum, you're in the Fearful Flyer group.
Yeah.
And so that just hanging out in these Facebook groups is not enough in order to move the needle and change your experience and change the way you not only think about flying, but the way you experience flying as, a non-fearful flyer, basically.
Yeah.
So,
and we
so
know
that's
who you are. We know who you are, who goes on to turbulence.com and weather.com and get yourself all amped up. And so we're going to provide you with some guidance and guidelines and a way to combat that and find peace in your life. It'll be life-changing, and we're really looking forward to it. We're sorry that it's taken a couple of delays here, but we really we want to make this a game-changing, a life-changing event for you. So
unlike your mother who would just say, you need to find some new hobbies, we will find some new hobbies. We'll help you find some new hobbies.
I listened to a podcast today about panic attacks, and what they said was, it doesn't help to tell your loved one who's having a panic attack, just get over it. Okay, it's a little bit more complex than that. So anyway, thanks again, Dieter, for putting this together tonight, supporting us. Thanks, Eric. And again, a final thanks to Arnold for joining us. And thanks of all things to you all out there for supporting us and coming back every week. And this is Captain Ron again, signing off. Until next week, Fearless Flight Live. We'll see you. Have a great week and stay safe.
Good night, you guys.
Good night, everybody.